Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time!
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah!
I finished these fights.
Give me a hell yeah!
Top Rope Nation.
Learn to love it. It's the best thing going today.
What's up, everyone? Coming at you a little earlier this week than usual because we have a very special show for you today. Since Dark Side of the Ring Season 3 premiered late last week, the life and times of Brian Pillman have been on everyone's mind. And so we reached out to a good friend of the show to come on and talk about the documentary and its production. So he is the author of the 2017 Wrestling Observer newsletter, Wrestling Book of the Year, Crazy Like a Fox, the definitive chronicle of Brian Pillman 20 years later. And, you know, outside of Pillman's family and closest friends, you're not likely to find more of an authority on the man's life. So making his fourth appearance on Top Rope Nation, I'd like to welcome back to the show, Mr. Liam O'Rourke. Liam, how you doing today?
I'm happier than a clam in high tide, Ryan, to be back on this show. Like I say, we couldn't, Justin's not with us, which, maybe for the best because I had some strong words about Tottenham, but I'm always thrilled to have Ryan and Kyle on the line with me here. Talk about Brian Pillman, no less, which is always great. So,
well, Justin has been trying to convert me into a Tottenham fan, so maybe I won't bring that up anymore. But I'm still a newbie. Maybe you can swim me to your side, Liam.
Well, I was going to say Wolves aren't doing too great, so I was going to say if Justin was here and he started giving me shit about Wolves, I would have been off this podcast quicker than Tottenham were out the Super League. But again, that's by the by. We're not here to talk about football or soccer.
Well, hey, man, it's been, about 9 months or so, I think, since you were on the show last. You did our SummerSlam fantasy draft last summer. You've been, like I said, 4 times. You've been a great supporter of Top Rope Nation pretty much since day one. I want to thank you for everything you've done to help get the word out about our show. I mean, the first time you came on the pod, our downloads in the UK exploded. So thank you for putting up all those billboards. I appreciate that.
That's all right. It's a very easy show to get into and be consistent with. So that's one thing that I miss about a lot of wrestling podcasts, and it's kind of a rare thing for me to kind of latch onto one and really like it. And Kyle Ross has obviously his obvious talents, so I'm not gonna. He's done it twice now with me, hooking me on a podcast, and obviously yourself, Ryan and Justin, you guys are just the best. You got a great rapport, and I love this show. So keep up the good work yourself.
I will, however, not ever forgive Liam for aping all of my picks in the SummerSlam draft. How he kept taking both. I was like, all right, I just want one of these, and he would take both of them. And that was very harsh.
Yeah, but I still lost somehow.
Yeah, the people are never right. You know that.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, that was a great show. Last August, you guys go back in the archives, check it out. Liam, first thing, I just want to start off by saying I want to ask about your involvement in the documentary. We've known for a while that you were kind of working with the producers of Dark Side of the Ring on this. I don't really know the extent of how you worked on it, though, so I want to get your thoughts and your description of that. Your name was in the closing credits. I noticed that. There was also a scene of Jim Cornette reading your book on the show with a big smile on his face, which was pretty cool to see. So what was the extent of your involvement with Dark Side in making the documentary?
Yeah, I think the last time I was on the show, you asked me what I was involved with at the minute in wrestling, and I had to very awkwardly say, not much.
Yeah.
So basically what happened was last July, Howard Sheffman, who's one of the story producers with Vice, got in touch with me basically telling me we want to do a Dark Side of the Ring on Brian Pillman. Evan loves the book and he wants to do a show. And he basically, he kind of talked around the fact that we believe we're going to get Steve Austin. So this is a go. If we get the all clear on Austin, this is going to happen. And before any of that happens, we wanted to talk to you. So I went back and forth with Howard, and we had a couple of good, back and forths. Had a long call where it was essentially at that point, I don't think Howard himself had read the book, or at least not read much of it, because he was asking me, what should the documentary be? Who should we talk to? And basically use me as like a myth buster for like some stories that were floating around on the internet about Brian. Stuff like the time that they were at the Residence Inn and there was a hostage situation. Did Brian Pillman go in there and take the guy down by himself? And all these little like internet things that have been flying around for a long time. He basically kind of used me as a foil to kind of separate fact from fiction. So I knew that it was coming, and I kind of helped. I hope got to steer the ship in a good direction. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, but I'm happy with the way that it went. And so that was pretty much my involvement. Was mostly at the front end.
Okay.
Yeah. Obviously, there are benefits to writing a book as opposed to trying to jam everything into a sub 2-hour documentary. Is there anything when you watch the doc you were like, oh, I wish this would have been in, and it wasn't?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this about an hour ago, and it was like there's a few things, because it's so hard. And one of the first things I said to Howard when this all started was I vividly remember within the first 5 minutes saying to him, if you plan on trying to tell this story in one show, you're going to have a really hard time. And it's not a discredit to them and the work they do, but there's a reason that I felt there needed to be a book in the first place, which is that the story is so involved and it's so fascinating, but there's so much to it that you can't really cram it in. I thought WWE, when they did their documentary in 2006, I thought they had a hard time with the 95 minutes or so that they had. So I said to Howard, look, you're going to need to find a way, because there's a lot of people that you can talk to, and there's a lot that you can say, and inevitably there were going to be things that were going to get either chopped or missed, or there's only certain things you can focus on. And I outright made the pitch to Howard when we talked about this in the beginning. Look, what people are going to want to know and what they're going to be most interested about is the loose cannon. They're going to want to know about the creation of the character, what the end goals were, the ebb and flow of what happened, leading to the Humvee wreck, leading to the end of his life. That period of time is going to be the most fascinating. Obviously, before that, as I kind of found out when I was doing the book, everything that led up to the loose cannon in his life kind of leads directly to the way he approaches the loose cannon. Part of the reason why it's such an interesting case. And so I really would have liked if there was a way that they could have kind of shoehorned a little bit more of the Bengal stuff in, and even some of the pre-wrestling stuff. They tried, man. They did a really good job. And I do want to commend them, because I think they did a really, really damn good job on those two documentaries. But that is something I really wish, some of that stuff is so good.
Yeah. Just think, though, Jim Ross, man, he had to be frothing at the mouth that he didn't get the Ed Block Courage Award reference written in. For the second team All-American. And by the way, the first team All-American that year was a guy by the name of Refrigerator Perry. It was never a 1990 WCW pay-per-view without those two references.
I almost wasn't sure it actually was Jim Ross because of the lack of Ed Block Courage Award.
Yeah. It had to get left on the cutting room floor. He had to have said it. There's no way he didn't say the Ed Block Courage Award.
Yeah, but again, just like from talking to Kim Wood over the years and emailing him in the previous weeks or so before this, I know that they spoke to him for 4 or 5 hours. So I could only, there's got to be a ton of stuff on the cutting room floor, because he would have tried to have told them everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so as you mentioned, you think they did a pretty good job kind of building up to that point early on in the documentary. What were your overall thoughts in the finished product? Doing the two-parter, I think that was a good, like you said, there's no way they could have done this in one episode. So to make it 2 parts, kind of like they did with the Benoit one, was good. We've talked a little bit about our thoughts, at least of part 1 last week on the podcast, but now that we've all seen the finished product, what did you make of it?
Very impressed. Very impressed that there's a lot to navigate. There's a lot of fact and fiction to sift through, and there were a couple of times when, because the first time I watched it, I was watching it through gritted teeth, man. I was just like, I'm looking for the errors. I'm looking for the things that are going to be wrong. I'm looking for, oh God, they're going to fuck this up. Here comes Eric on his Harley. Who knows what's going to happen here? And I'm just thinking to myself, this could go real bad if they don't tell this story right. And thankfully, they kind of were able, and again, I feel like they kind of followed the blueprint of the book in this sense, where they allowed everybody to have their say, but at the same time, the narrative was kept in line with what it should have been. And I thought they did a hell of a job, considering how many people they had as talking heads, considering they could have had even more people as talking heads that were available. Again, just a really, really commendable job. I think that there's always going to be things in a documentary with subjects that are this complicated and this complex, because believe me, the real life stuff is far more complex than people see on the documentary, and even more complex. I did as best a job as I could of trying to capture it in the book, but it's a crazy story, that the Melanie, Rochelle, Brian triangle. And that was a really big focus in the first episode. And that's really tough to truly capture. because there's a lot of elements in play there. But again, nothing but the highest regard for that. They did a hell of a job. I honestly think it may be one of the best jobs they've done. Maybe that or Owen on their show so far.
You mentioned Melanie. I wanted to follow up, and I agree with you. I do think it was a tippy top Dark Side of the Ring. Was Melanie portrayed fairly, do you think, particularly part one? Because, that was the big talking point when everyone got to see that. Obviously, at times she can come across as, for lack of a better term, a heel in the book or in that documentary. Did you think that was a fair representation of her?
Oh, man, that is such a complicated thing. Yes and no. There's a lot to break down here. So when I watched it the first time, like I said, I'm watching it through gritted teeth. I'm seeing that stuff the same way everybody else is. The second time I watched it, I'm catching things that I didn't catch the first time. And Melanie does come off pretty damn bad in the first one. Even more so than she maybe needed to, because I believe that as bad as Melanie dealt with the Rochelle situation and the custody issue, and obviously Brittany hates her and it's called a pure evil. And I think there's a stark thing when you first see her, if you haven't seen the mug shots and you don't know what she looks like, and you see her for the first time, it's like, whoa, what the hell? That's Melanie Pillman, it almost doesn't look like the same person. I thought that it was fair in the sense that, yeah, the story is what it is, and it's not pretty. But having said that, knowing the story very, very well, I believe, and I think this should be said, that Melanie took a bit of a bullet on that show, especially in part one, when she was talking about Rochelle and basically just admitting outright, yes, I did it wrong. I can't undo it. I messed up. And obviously she did. There's a lot of stuff. Rochelle, the point is, Rochelle was going down a very, very dark path, and things were really bad, worse than people know. And because of that, I think that there was a degree of the custody was not necessarily the wrong thing to do for Brittany's sake. The way that it all actually unfolded and some of the things that she did, Melanie and Rochelle, the story that she tells about, taking her away and stuff like that, and charges of child kidnapping and things like that, which again, and there's more to that as well. There's a lot of bad stuff that was going on, but in that sense, it was really kind of hard to watch for me, because it's like, I know Melanie is the heel in a lot of ways in this story, but funnily enough, the stuff when I thought she came off the worst in the book, which is near the end of Brian's life and in the aftermath, they almost kind of babyfaced her a little bit in part two by almost kind of treating it like the Pillman death was the reason she and everything kind of went to hell, which may be the case. I'm certainly not one to judge that, but I just think that that the relationship was going to hell in a handbasket by the end. And like I say, in the book, it talks a lot about like the court stuff that was going on and anger management classes for Pillman and oh god, it was just an absolute mess. And so yeah, it was a real tough balancing act watching that show, because it's like, on one hand, I really want to be like, yeah, well, she came off like a heel and she was always gonna. And then on the other hand, it's like, but at the same time, there's like it also helped her cause that they showed that fucking putrid thing the night after Pillman died, and she gets to explain.
Man. Oh my god!
The way Vince just shelled her on live TV. So, I won't talk about drugs. So Melanie, how about them drugs? And then the little wince at the corner of her mouth, where it's like, you've just been worked, honey. Unfortunately, welcome to the business.
Yeah. You know what's like so crazy? This is a question that we could send around the horde, not just for Liam. It's like, something's bad, right? You remember it being bad.
Yeah.
It's got the narrative of being bad. And then you watch it again in the context of this documentary, and you're like, Jesus, that was really bad. Like, referring to Melanie on Raw the next night, I was like, it's very rare. I've seen so many things so many times, in this business. But with that, it's just like, oh my God, was that even worse than it's given credit for? It was just horrific that they did that. And, Jim Ross and Jim Cornette were both like, yeah, we didn't like that. We didn't want it. So yeah, it was jarring how bad it was. Even
Ryan. Ryan, what do you think?
I don't, I remember watching it. I certainly haven't rewatched that over the years, but like when I watched it back on Dark Side, it was worse than I remembered. Just like with the questions of drug use and where do you go now? How do you feed your family? Like, what are you doing, man? So like, yeah, we know WWE has done a lot of poor taste things over the years. And this, yeah, I guess this one does kind of come up when people talk about that, but not as much as it should. I mean, this is up there.
Is it Mount Rushmore of poor WWE taste?
I think it is.
Yes.
I think it is. She hasn't even had time to process the information yet, you know? And like, there's a camera like zooming in on the face, like, get those tears going by asking those tough questions, Vince. Shit, that's good TV. And it's just like, you look at it and you're like, oh man, this just shows. Except I felt the same when I watched it for the book, knowing how bad it was. And I'm just like sitting there in awe. Like, this is just goes to show how deep in the toilet bowl Vince is willing to lick.
Seriously. No kidding.
On the lighter side of the talking head department, no pun intended, Kim Wood obviously has gotten a lot of attention for his, I don't know, lack of a better term, performance on the Dark Side of the Ring podcast. Now, he was on the WWE DVD. People seem to have forgotten that, but he was a lot more forthright is maybe the right term on this one.
Yeah.
You obviously talked to him a lot for the book.
Yeah.
And you talked about, they've got 5 hours of stuff, the producers of the documentary. Well, you've got to have a lot of stuff too. How critical is it to Kim Wood's honesty that he has like no connections to pro wrestling or the major players within the industry?
I think Kim Wood is Kim Wood. I got 15 hours of recorded calls when I was interviewing Kim for the book because he does not give a fuck. He's the way he is in real life. It's just it's just funny you bring this up. I might have said this when we talked about this at the time, but Kim Wood told me that when they interviewed him for the Pillman documentary in 2006, he pretty much did the exact same thing. 5 hours, told them everything, and they just hacked him to pieces. And they barely, what you saw was a very kind of calm. He even said the line which they didn't show on the documentary, which I put in the book, about how if Brian was around when Steph came along, he'd have got there first before Triple H. He said that to them on the WWE recorded documentary. He said that to them, and of course, somehow didn't make the cutting room floor. But I'm sorry, it didn't make the final cut. It did make the cutting room floor. But that's Kim, man. He's just he's incredibly intelligent, and I think it's really good that people saw him talk his way to understand that this was the guy that was shaping Brian Pillman's perspective. Because when you look at it through that lens, man, does it become crystal clear the way that Brian Pillman looked at these guys. And just, again, because like, the great line that everybody repeats of what do you do with a whore? You fuck them, that Kim says about Vince. He said that to me. He said, again, he has so little regard for Vince and Bischoff during that time. It's beautiful. I mean, I've been emailing him for the last few days, and it's just like, he doesn't care. He doesn't, the people he's been around in his life, Kim Wood, these guys are small fry compared to that. So he just laughs at it.
Liam, Kim Wood comparing Vince McMahon to a whore, is that a top 5 moment in the history of this great sport?
Yeah, I think so. It wasn't even just the fact that he said it, it's the shrug afterwards, where he's just like, I said that and I don't give a fuck that I said that. It's tremendous.
Now that was not left on the cutting room floor for the Pillman WWE DVD, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
So you mentioned another name, and I suppose we should get to this guy. Eric Bischoff was in the documentary. What did you think about his performance and him still being on an island, clinging to this notion that he willfully gave the release and knew what was going on rather than being worked, as opposed to the stories you've told, Kim Wood tells, Meltzer's side. I mean, it's kind of like everyone is on this side and then Bischoff's off to himself on the island. What did you think of Bischoff still clinging to that?
A couple things. So I think it's kind of beautiful in a way. Don't you think? It's like when a kid knows Santa Claus isn't really real, but he tells himself that it is anyway. Like, it was quite admirable to see his conviction after all these years that he still thinks he knows something that everybody else didn't know, when that was the entire approach to what was going on. Yeah, the thing with Eric, to give a modicum of credit, if this isn't even credit, it's just more of an alibi, I can understand him having absolutely no... his memory sucks. Like, his memory is legitimately awful. He'll be the first to say it. So, like, I don't even think that, I don't even know that he remembered. And there was a point in the documentary where he's talking about the figures that Brian Pillman wanted in his contract, about how he was on 225, wanted 4. And that to me stuck out like a sore thumb. Like, how the fuck do you remember that? Like,
Right.
you surely have read up on this recently, because there's no way, given your lack of memory for certain other things, that you remember that. It's some people. It was laughable. Let's call a spade a spade. In terms of trying to still push this idea, and he's gonna, because otherwise, it's the reason he didn't like the book in the first place. He's the mark in the scam, and the whole point of concocting this idea, the reason why it worked, was because Kim Wood had the belief that this guy's a mark for himself, and as a result, he will never want to. First of all, he'll want to be the guy who's pulling the rib on all the other guys. Even though he's already in power, even though he's already the boss, he still would want the perception that he's controlling this master plan and ahead of them in some strange way. It's kind of beautiful, because like the fact that he was such the nature of Bischoff, that being his nature, at least Kim's perception of his nature, is the reason why in the end he will give you the money. And he actually did make the bigger offer, which again is another thing that I think is, Eric missed or didn't say, because obviously it breaks his narrative. But the truth is, he did make the bigger offer to Brian, and Brian took the lower offer because of the deal, the 90-day release clause that they weren't going to break, even though they broke it for other people. But that's just the way it is, and I don't think we're ever going to get anything else out of Bischoff. Even though the funny thing is, Bischoff in previous interviews in years gone by has actually kind of acknowledged that it was what it was. Now he's sticking to his guns like it's 1996 all over again, which is very bizarre. But I think trying to read anything more into that with Eric is a waste of time.
Rumors and innuendo, pro wrestling's equivalent of shouting fake news at somebody because you have no argument to counter them. You use certain terms to describe Bischoff, mark for himself, whatnot. He doesn't strike me as a dumb person, though. He doesn't. You don't think that he really believes what he's saying. He's just trying to save face publicly.
Yeah, I don't believe him. I don't believe him, because he wouldn't have said, if you're going to juxtapose Kim, I'll tell you this, right? I can guarantee Kim Wood in 2005 said the exact same stories in the exact same way as he has in 2021 when it comes to Brian Pillman. I know that for a fact. Not a break in the story, not a flub, not a difference, not a flaw. Bischoff, it goes from doesn't know if thinks that Brian probably worked him, kind of acknowledges that he did, to now it's like if he truly had the conviction that he had, his story wouldn't have changed. So I don't believe that he really believes it, other than this is basically a way to tell the story. It might be a thing where he's resentful of the fact that he's kind of seen the way that he's seen, especially because he did accomplish something incredibly impressive all those years ago. And the fact that now this story comes along that makes him like a goof, maybe he just feels like he doesn't want to get beaten up anymore, and he just wants to kind of stick to his guns and mount a defense for himself. But again, it's kind of a sad state of the media where you can get away with that.
Yeah.
Even Conrad, to his credit, because I remember listening to that podcast.
Oh yeah.
And I remember getting angry. You guys will laugh at this. I was on the treadmill listening to it. And you know how it measures your heart rate? Like it asks for your
Oh my God, I know where this is going. Yeah.
And I'm getting really mad because I think I texted you right after I listened, both of you right after I listened to when Bischoff talked about Pillman. And the heart rate thing it slowed down. The treadmill had to automatically slow down because my heart rate was so elevated. I was getting so fired up. But Conrad called him out. He's like, I thought he was going to end the podcast with Bischoff.
So did I.
Particular podcast. I mean, the entire idea of the podcast. He's like, dude, this is why people say I shouldn't even be doing this podcast. Who's going to believe that you intentionally let someone out of a deal to go to WWF in the middle of the Monday Night Wars?
Right.
Yeah.
So you can imagine my heart rate when I was listening to that thing.
let's address that, Liam, because I talked about the book at the top, and you had an opportunity to go to Vegas to do the panel at Starrcast on Pillman's life. You're on the stage with Dave Meltzer, Brian Jr., and you interacted with Eric Bischoff that weekend. Do you want to tell the listeners about that and respond?
Yeah, I'm very glad you give me a chance to say this, because obviously Kim Wood was on Observer Radio a couple of days ago and mentioned the story, and I wanted to have a chance to kind of give the full story to anybody who didn't hear it. He mentioned that Bischoff cornered me and was complaining about the book, which isn't exactly how it went down. And Eric, again, I don't want to give him too much credit. I think that makes him sound bad and maybe worse in this situation than it actually really was. And also because the real story is more entertaining. So I'll set the scene to try and bring a little bit more to it. I was at the pool at the Tuscany with my brother, who had just won he won some money at Caesars. So he was basically lying by the pool, buying expensive cocktails and just chatting to the waitress.
This is how all good stories begin.
Yeah.
I like this. Yes.
And I was like, yeah, and I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna just head up to my room for a bit, and I'll catch up with you a little while. I'll do what you want. So I'm heading up, and on my way to go to my room, I'm passing, because it was just the weirdest weekend anyway, because the Tuscany was one of 2 hotels that they were using to base everybody out of. So like, there's one point where I'm just like going to go and get something from the shop, and here's Brutus Beefcake walking past me, looking like just the sleaziest fucking guy you've ever seen. Just, oh god, just looked like a mess. And as I go from the pool,
so a normal Friday is what you're saying.
As I go from the pool up to my room, I'm passing all these luminaries. Like, hey, there's Glacier. That's interesting. Stevie Ray's standing over there. And then what really should have been a telltale sign, I look to the bar and I see Sonny Ono. It's like, what's he doing here? That should have been a dead giveaway for what was about to happen. I turn around the corner to get on the elevator, and Bischoff is standing there by himself. And I just kind of like walk up to his side and kind of look over to him. And he knows that I'm recognizing him. So he puts on this like smile face and extends his hand. And I just kind of like give it a little chuckle and shake his hand back. And I'm holding his hand. And as I'm holding his hand, I say to him, I hope you like difficult rides in the elevator, because this is probably going to be one. And he kind of gets this puzzled look on his face. And as we enter, I say to him, yeah, the Brian Pillman book that you buried on your podcast, I'm the guy that wrote it. So now that I have a chance to talk to you, I'd like you to explain why you were so full of shit on that show. Which was a great thrill to be able to say that to him. And he was just like, but probably because, again, if anything, when the story that Kim said that he cornered me, if anything, it was probably the opposite, which probably doesn't make me look too good, but I don't really care. So I just said to him, exactly what I said, why were you so full of shit on the show? And he basically said, oh, well, I think I just thought that it was poorly written. I was like, oh, really? Okay, so tell me what you didn't like about the book then, since you clearly didn't read it. And he went, I read enough. I said, you didn't read it? And he goes, I read enough. I said, you didn't fucking read it. Conrad sent you notes, I know for a fact. So why are you lying? You didn't read it. And I said, I can tell you for a fact you didn't read it, because on your podcast you told a story about how the book says that Bischoff, when he would negotiate with the guys, that he would take his false teeth out, put them on a plate, crack his knuckles. He's got pictures of him doing his karate and his kung foolery on the wall, and basically that the story as it was given to me by Kim Wood was Brian told Kim this, and this was kind of the basis for Kim saying, well, if he wants people to think he's a tough guy, they're sending you a red flag that they can be fucked with, and we can get this guy. And he's like, yeah, that story was such bullshit. And I said, yeah, but the book doesn't say that it happens. The book says that Brian told Kim that, and Kim's relaying the story, but you wouldn't know the difference because you didn't read it. And he kind of like stood there and he was like, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying, man. And then he goes, man, this convention's really big, huh? and it's like, with that, it's just like, that's it. That's the end of this conversation. He doesn't want to talk about this topic anymore. I gave him his chance for a rebuttal after I told him how he was wrong, and he didn't have an answer. So that was the end of that. And then he walked on his merry way to do the Stevie Ray podcast or something.
Wow.
Is he still paying Stevie Ray, by the way?
He might be, actually. I'm not sure about Eric's financial state these days, but
what a great story that is. That was even better than the one I got before. Wow. So glad you got to tell that.
Yeah, so you talked about, how there was the trio situation with Rochelle and Melanie and Brian, and you really have to read your book to understand the full scope of that. Like, they covered it on the show a little bit, but if you want all the details, like you're talking about, read the book, read Liam's book, you'll get kind of the full scope of everything that happened. And a lot of people were saying, yeah, Melanie kind of came off as the heel in this. I saw some other people saying Brittany was like the star of it, along with Kim Wood. And I just wanted to ask you, and just for the sake of our listeners, Who from the Pillman family were you able to interview in writing the book? Did you talk to Brittany? Did you
Yeah,
talk to Melanie? What were those interactions like?
No, it was Brittany. I tried to get. Sorry, Melanie. I tried to get a hold of. Couldn't get her. Brittany, I did. Brian Jr. I did. Linda Pillman, who I thought was an absolute gem in this, as she was in the book, and is just a great human being. She was awesome. And so from the Pillman family, those were the key three: Linda, Brian, and Brittany. At the point when I spoke to them, I believe they were all living together in the house that Linda has bought for them. Danny didn't live there, so I didn't get a chance to speak to her. But yeah, they were all great, all welcoming, all wanting to talk about their dad. And that's the thing that was going to make this so easy, and it always was. The people, when I was doing the book, and I'm sure for this podcast too, they all want to talk about Brian. There's something unique about him and his case that makes you want to tell the stories. The stories are so interesting, they're so exciting, and so unique that it's just like, they want a chance to talk, they want a chance to kind of relay and kind of relive the memory of Brian a little bit. So it was very easy for me, and they were all completely forthcoming as they were on the documentary.
I saw something on Twitter. I think it was the day of part 2. Somebody wrote, "Can you imagine?" And it's really ludicrous to even try to imagine a modern day equivalent of Brian Pillman in 20. Like, it just couldn't happen the way wrestling is. Like, somebody, obviously there needs to be a lot of things that exist, two companies to play off each other, personalities like that. But like, there's just no, like, to the point of this story being so unique, there's just never really going to be another performer, another guy in this business like that, is there?
I don't think so. I think that the layout, the dynamics of the industry have changed so greatly. It was interesting when CM Punk was doing this stuff in 2012, 11,
11.
The
Yeah.
Summer of Punk, yeah.
The Summer of Punk 2011, the promo in Vegas. That was so interesting to me, just being a giant Pillman fan and a student of his, was like, okay, everybody's really quite into this, but nobody believes it in the same way. It's not the same thing. And I think that a lot of people kind of made the disconnect. There was a bit of a disconnect in the way that people looked at it, where they thought, oh my God, this is so incredible because of all this inside stuff. They would talk about how so many lapsed fans had come back because of that. And I'm sure maybe to a degree that was true, but it didn't really show that much in the numbers. And that was kind of the thing that was the interesting part of Pillman, was that it didn't there either. And the design was never, for everything that Brian was doing, the design was never really to draw money with that period of time, the loose cannon. It was just get attention, because then it will pay off when the contract time comes. With Punk, it was something that they put in place while his contract was coming. Again, this is actually kind of, it's like the reverse Pillman, the Punk thing was, which is funny. The company put together this fake loose cannon, even though Punk's contract was legitimately coming up and was able to get a better deal because of it. So it was kind of that's probably the closest that you're ever going to be able to come. But the interesting thing is, as much as the dynamics have changed greatly, now with Twitter and with the internet, and with there being so fewer casual fans now as there were then, you've got a hub of people now who kind of have the same knowledge base when they watch TV. And if anything, you could probably fuck with that if you really wanted to, because now there's such an assumption of knowledge. Now people think they know so much that when something ever happens that deviates from it, it catches people ajar. And I'm not saying, I don't think you could have another Brian Pillman again. I think that's what makes his case so interesting, especially this many years later, because the further we go from the business being the way it was then, the more spectacular and standout the story becomes. But at the same time, it's like, you probably could mess with this audience more than you do. And again, you got to be careful that you don't dip into WCW territory of doing that, the inside stuff that is just never going to draw money and doesn't do anything for anybody apart from fool the wrestlers who aren't being fooled, and creates that horrible kind of echo chamber of disgust and resentment.
Do you think the filmmakers did a good job in kind of portraying how edgy that was for the time? Because, for younger fans watching today, the stuff that he was doing with the loose cannon, like calling Kevin Sullivan Booker Man in the ring, they might not think that that's a huge deal now, right? But like when that was happening in 95 and into 96, like that was, it didn't happen back then. So they really had to like lay the case that it was a different industry back then. Do you think that they did a good job getting that across?
They did an admirable job, I think. I think they did it. I think they did. I think they set the table, but it's like it's the equivalent of the ladder match, with Shawn and Razor, where it's like you show people today, the people who've lived through CM Punk and who've lived through kind of insidey comments and references to real life that have kind of been commonplace and barely really even register with people anymore. Fucking what was it on last week? Scorpio Sky calling Sting Steve.
Yeah.
In his promo, which I could have done without, but like stuff like that. Can you imagine back in the day, like someone called Hulk Terry? Like
Yeah.
Zeus calls Hulk Terry. Like it's just that's just, it's just not going to happen now. That kind of stuff. It's like water for ducks back to the audience now because it's like been there, done it, seen it, and again, Brian. The whole idea that Pillman had was you got to do something that hasn't been done before. You've got to do something that no one has ever seen, and you're going to have to do something that creates an awful lot of talk and attention. And what area can you create talk in? And the area that you can create talk in is the insider crowd. And that was the key. The timing of it was so absolutely critical. There's an ECW chant at King of the Ring 95. There's groundswells of smart fans who are kind of resistant to the big two. And it's that kind of newsletter crowd. It's the tape trading crowd. It's the real hardcore fans. The stuff that he was doing was appealing to. It wasn't appealing to the casual fan. They had no fucking idea what he was doing, probably, other than wow, he seems like he's whacked. But that's about it. But like the people who know, all they're talking about is Brian Pillman, and because guys like Vince and guys like Bischoff, they're very detached from reality when you're in that world because you're working 24/7. So when the only chatter you hear from this kind of small community, relatively small community at that time, is really, really loud. Brian Pillman, Brian Pillman, Brian Pillman. Again, even if Vince doesn't hear it, Bruce Pritchard's going to hear it. Jim Ross is going to hear it. Jim Cornette's going to hear it. And so as soon as that starts, they're following. And again, at that time, end of 95, start 96, neither side was ahead in the war. It's very even. Both sides are looking for that one thing, whatever it's going to be, to pull ahead. And you got all these people saying, Brian Pillman's, oh my God, this is insane. This is revolutionary. We've never seen it before. And again, it was that manipulation of the environment to create the bidding war, which they talked about a lot on Dark Side of the Ring. And I do think they did a good job of at least emphasizing that aspect of things. Again, you've only got so much time. So again, and that's one of those things where when it was finished, I'm sure you felt the same. This could have been a 5-part series.
Oh, yeah. Sure. I mean, yeah, we were joking about, with that Savage doc that just aired. I was like, right, if we laid out and said, hey, here on Top Rope Nation, we're going to examine the career of Randy Savage, how long is that going to go?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we're going to do like 9 parts, like say with Pillman. I think, a way maybe I'm thinking in my head, listening to you, Liam, say what you just did, to summarize what Pillman was trying to do. He wasn't trying to draw money for any promotion. He was just trying to draw money for himself.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was a very business-oriented decision. I mean, we don't have a lot of people like that. I mean, it talked about, it's a different thing, but Kevin Nash talked about, always looking at it as a business, and Pillman was just looking at it as a business. He wasn't looking to necessarily line the pockets of Vince McMahon or Eric Bischoff. He was smartly so trying to line his own pockets. With the creation of the character, and the effect it had on his personal life towards the end, do you think that was covered in an appropriate fashion as we kind of moved into part 2 of the?
Yeah, I mean, they did touch on it. They touched on aspects of all of a sudden that's Brian now. Brian he's kind of just metamorphosized into this is the way he is. He's living this character 24/7. But again, I think that's one of those things where the deeper you go, the more you realize how true that is. Like, I think that the stuff about how he bought the Hummer on a whim, the stuff like how, and again, he got a deal on it, but these things that were like, they weren't conducive to his end goal. And the thing that's funny is, like, when this all starts, everything is so absolutely on point. It's laser focused. It's such precision. It's a precision that you didn't see from individuals, like you say, focusing on trying to get themselves over rather than trying to draw money for a company. There was something unique about it that basically everything he was doing was moving towards the end game. And then as he warps into the character more and more and more, and it's something that Raven, who was awesome in the book, talked about, to me, was like the thing, because it happened to him too. And he was explaining the entire process. He was like, basically what happens is when it begins, art imitates life. There was something, in his own character, Raven, he was unhappy with his life, and there were things that he was, kind of miserable about. So he brings out of himself as a character. That's my character. And then as time goes by, because he's living that now, and he's trying to make it as convincing and as good as possible by reaching into himself, basically that line gets blurred. And the way he described it was, at first, art imitates life, and then in the end, life will imitate art. It happens to a lot of guys who throw themselves in that deeply. And in Brian's case, this was coming off the back of Rochelle committing suicide. And it was coming again at this crucial point in his career. He's 33 years old. His body is starting to break down. He knows he can't be Flying Brian forever. He wants to be a top guy, and he's seeing the window close, and he knows he has to do something drastic. And he throws himself into this wholeheartedly, possibly as a personal release, but again, more as a business thing. But again, those lines blur, and as time went by, I mean, you're hearing it from Raven talking about how, after CyberSlam, where he debuts in ECW in '96, they're at the hotel room and they just have a cocaine binge, and Brian's just like, and again, Brian was like that anyway. He did stuff, but it was just the way he was. Like, again, the lines get blurred. The staying up at all hours of the night trying to convince people you're crazy, you're going to end up going fucking crazy. And he ended up totaling that Hummer, which ruined everything, and was pretty much the beginning of the end of the poor bastard's life.
Yeah,
and then after that, we even talking about part 2, the aftermath of the Hummer wreck, where he's trying to keep up and he's trying to medicate himself, and it's just like, this is just an absolute disaster. And that's the one thing when Carl was talking earlier on about, when you watch the Melanie interview back and you realize, as bad as you thought it was at the time, it's worse when you see it. There were times when I was doing the book, and even now, if you watch Raw from '97, there are times where Brian will do a run-in, or Brian will do something, and you just see him limping, and he's walking askew, and you just see it, and you just think, Jesus Christ, this guy has no business doing any of this. Like that match at SummerSlam '97 he has with Gold.
I was just to bring that up, the finish.
Oh my God, which is just an absolute train wreck. And there's things in that match. There's a spot that Pillman loved to do in his big matches where he'd be on the top rope and the guy would rocket launcher him crotch first on the top rope. And he did it a lot. He tries to do it in the match with Goldust, except that means he has to land on his feet. So he tries to shift his weight so that he doesn't land on his feet, and he just fucking crashes face first on the ring apron and just eats it. And it's like, you should not be doing this, Brian. You're trying so hard to sustain what you are and your reputation and your position in this company, and it ain't happening. Your body won't go with you, and unfortunately, it really didn't go with him at the end.
Yeah, you hear Steve Austin talking about how he could barely get through the airport, at the time, and yet he was still somehow wrestling, and you kind of see what's happening now looking back. And it's so unfortunate just with the timing, because obviously he would have gotten a big money offer at the time he was doing the loose cannon thing, and that, that kind of changed the trajectory of his career. Brian, in a lot of ways, was like the Attitude Era before the Attitude Era, right? Like he was the perfect guy as the business was transitioning, where you could have seen him, if he could work how he used to, like a rocket ship, right? He could have been one of the top stars in wrestling. And it's like one of those ultimate what if scenarios when you think about it. And they kind of get into that a little bit at the end, and how tragic that portion of the story is, where his kids were barely able to get meals, and they could have been like Steve Austin's, or living in a situation where they don't have, not saying they would have been living in a different country from Steve Austin, but they could have been like not wanting for anything. They could have had a lot of money because their dad would have been in this massive star. And it just really sucks looking back how everything aligned with the business and the way the business went, and he wasn't able to capitalize on that. I mean, do you agree with that? Where do you think his career arc would have went had that Hummer accident not happened?
Yeah, there's a lot to disseminate there. One of the things, a quote that I didn't put in the book, but I loved it. Paul Heyman said once that somebody asked Heyman, "Don't you think that Pillman was ahead of his time?" And Heyman comes back and says, "No, he was the master of the time that he was in." Because again, you couldn't have done that much later. The fact that he was there at the crest of the wave of that kind of style of personality, I think that sums it up perfectly. In terms of his career trajectory, man, that personality, those promos with a good working ability, even if it wasn't as good as it was before, it still would have been really good. You throw that in the WWF when Shawn's champ and Austin's getting hot and Brett's there, that you could do so much. And obviously he was never intending to go to the WWF, really. That wasn't really his end game. But I think when you look at the way that it kind of went, if you pretend, which is hard to do, that everything else around Brian was going to be the same anyway, which who knows if it would have. But if Brian had gone to WCW as he'd originally planned, stuck with WCW as he originally planned, got the good deal, and all that stuff, he still would have been behind Hogan, Savage, Sting, Luger, and Flair, the incoming Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. He still probably wouldn't have gotten what he truly wanted. What he wanted main event money, and he wanted the respect and the prestige of being a top guy. That was his goal. Really, it was about the money, but when you get one, you get the other, and he absolutely wanted to be a top guy. I don't think he gets truly what he wants, because as the business explodes, he's probably not going to get ahead of all those guys in WCW, and the level of his money probably only increases as the business does. So I think what probably happens is, if you look at the WWF and how things went over there, that 3-year deal he would have signed with Bischoff, that's coming up in the start of '99, when Steve Austin is red hot, Jim Ross is over there, Cornette's over there. Brian probably would have been in the Jericho position of everybody saying he could be a top guy, but not being a top guy. I think that he probably ends up there anyway. And especially because at that time they were offering big money to get guys to jump. So I think that he probably would have ended up there anyway, I think.
God, you can imagine '99, him main eventing with Steve Austin, building off that, that history. They tried a little bit when he came over, but obviously they couldn't do what they could have done in '99 if there was no car crash. My God.
They needed new heels in '99.
Exactly.
God, did they ever?
I did a podcast with friend Zach Hadorn over at the Torch several months ago, and we looked at Austin's '99 pay-per-view run. And he's working with like the same guys over and over. So if you could insert a healthy Brian Pillman into that, wow.
Yeah, that's it. There's one point where the Torch in '99 is talking about the WWF depth chart on the heel side, and it was like Undertaker, Triple H, Boss Man, Jarrett, and it's like, holy shit! Like,
yeah,
you don't realize how bad that is until you really see it.
People forget, man. I mean, the business was on fire, so I guess it's just water under the bridge. But from WrestleMania 15 until they figured out Triple H at the end of the year, figured out by, reassembling DX as his lackeys. Obviously, the addition of Stephanie to the presentation put him over the hump. There was not a lot there in WWF. He would have fit perfectly. I mean, we know Steve, they talked about it in his documentary. He was kind of not keen on a lot of the new guys they were trying to have work with him. He would have obviously been keen on working with Brian.
Yeah, for sure. And you see the way he was, and you wonder if he could have stayed hot, if he could have stayed like the Brian Pillman that people think he could have been and saw glimpses of in '96. It's like he feels like he'd be the Piper to Austin's Hogan, that type of dynamic. And it's like that's where it gets so sad, because it's like you didn't even get to see really a glimpse of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about Brian Jr.? Obviously now in AEW they explored that at the end, him getting his wrestling career started. What do you think about Brian Jr. now kind of as a performer, and how hard it is, because we've seen this, countless number of times, following a famous dad in this business?
Yeah, it's tough. I think it's doubly tough for him, because it wasn't, although actually maybe in a way this kind of mirrors his dad, he wasn't super religious, from what I understand, about watching wrestling before he got in. He kind of had like a passing interest. I remember him telling me that like he liked Chris Jericho and stuff like that, but he wasn't a student before he got in. I'm sure he's a student now, but I think it's always going to be hard. In a sense, it's like it's as it always tends to be. It's the gift and the curse at the same time. Look at Dustin Rhodes. Dustin, again, especially with modern eyes, you look back like, fuck, Dustin was really good, really quick. But during those first couple of years when Dusty was the booker in WCW, people couldn't get it out of their mouths. Oh, nepotism. Oh, Dustin's getting the push because of who his dad is and stuff like that. And that held him back for years, because people, I don't think, appreciate how good Dustin was until later, when actually he was banging out great stuff, pretty much, I mean, not straight away, but like it didn't take him long, and again, he's working with good guys as well.
Yeah.
But it is that gift and curse situation. And sometimes you can, I think there's a chance that if crowds are around now and Brian Pillman Jr. walked out on TV this week, I think he'd get a massive reaction from the way that he conducted himself on Dark Side of the Ring. He came off, man, when he's talking about how no one played catch with him and he wanted his dad to play catch with him, that was fucking brutal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like these, there's something there they could, and again, like when you see him at Double or Nothing, he was in the Battle Royal. The first AEW show, Double or Nothing, and we're watching him walking down the aisle with he's dressed like a star, he's got the big blonde mullet and everything like that at the time, and it's like he stands out in the crowd, and that's half the battle, especially in this modern landscape. And it's like if he can not look like because obviously the rate, the talent level of the in-ring is higher now than it's been in years when it comes to mainstream American wrestling. But at the same time, the intangibles are the intangibles in a lot of guys are not where they used to be. So now you got a guy like Brian Jr. who really, if Brian Jr. can make it, it will be because of his intangibles. And it's just about harnessing it, getting the chance to do it. And we'll see, in AEW has been slotted in a certain position for certain reasons. And I think that it's just a thing of when it's his time. Yeah, and we'll see when it's his time. We'll see. I'm not even sure. I don't even believe that he's under contract to AEW. So
yeah, last I heard, it was just working spots for him. So I mean, he's on there a lot, but it's not like a long-term deal.
Yeah, so maybe he'll play like his dad now that he's got this attention and momentum, and he'll play both sides.
There you go.
Something? That would be something.
Oh man, Kyle, did you have anything else that I saw your kind of general list of questions? I think we hit all those, didn't we?
No, I think we did. The Bischoff stuff, the Kim Wood stuff, the particularly clarifying what happened in Vegas. Fear and loathing with Bischoff there. What an incredible situation. So glad you gave this a Melanie. Yeah, I just think overall, it's just always so great to talk to Liam, and obviously a very good friend. It's great to talk to him, whether the mics are turned on or not. I enjoy texting him random things about pro wrestling, his thoughts on Dynamite and whatnot. But I don't know. It's so awesome that, we watch this documentary, everybody really likes it. And it's like, oh, hey, we know the guy who wrote the definitive book on the man's life. It's
absolutely.
Such a cool thing.
Plus, you guys have been collaborating over on Squared Circle Gazette Radio. As I understand, Liam, you're recording later this week with Kyle. So
we will be continuing our 1991 series, which has been, granted, folks, I know the break has been long since the last one, but bear with us. There's a lot to sift through. But yeah, the 1991 series has been an absolute blast. Kyle's takes and perspectives are always gold, as they are on this show. And it's just great to go through that period of time, man. I love. Yeah, so that's some of the most fun podcasting I've done in forever, because it's just so great to go and watch that television back, see, and again, the notes from the time, which again, as you're a fan, you don't really see it. So you kind of as you're doing it concurrently, Meltzer's notes combined with the TV, and it's just holy Christ, this was either better or worse or than you expect. And it's a lot of fun. I'll be waving the Adnan flag, as it were.
I mean, when those new episodes drop in our group text of the Top Rope Nation people, Justin and I, it's like an orgy of wrestling fandom talking about those shows. I mean, it's just, they're unbelievable. You guys did the 1990 series. You're going to be concluding the 91 series. Hopefully more in the future after that. I think all of our listeners certainly need to check it out, because Kyle, yes, the Rain Man of wrestling knowledge, and Liam, the award-winning author, you can't beat that historical coverage.
Yeah, I'll tell you. So we're only looking at July and August coming up. And, people are like, oh, that's 2 months. That's no big deal. But I think if you were around at that time and you hear, oh my God, July and August of 1991, Liam, I don't know about you. I've looked at our final draft. And by the way, I hope that you don't sit back in your private time and say, oh my God, I'm freaking doing this with the Randy Savage of podcasting. How OCD is this guy with these freaking notes? I send Liam these notes, and I think I write out the jokes I'm going to tell in the podcast. And you've seen it too, Ryan. I'll write in the notes, never to tell this joke.
Make sure to reference this. Yeah.
Make sure to reference this. But I mean, it's insane. I mean, we're going to talk later this week for about 3 hours of that period, we think, and we'll not get to the Ric Flair coming to WWF story. That's how much happens just with, wow. I mean, the fallout of George Zahorian and Hulk Hogan's, I cannot wait, because I
can see him getting aroused from here.
Oh, have you watched it already?
I watched it last night. Hulk Hogan at Arsenio Hall. People can find it on YouTube. It is 13 minutes. If anyone's ever wanted to watch 13 consecutive minutes of lying, Google Hulk Hogan on Arsenio Hall 1991 and watch that clip, because he literally does not say one accurate thing for 13 minutes. It is a true just marvel to watch that back with all this perspective. But yeah, we're going to talk about that in SummerSlam, the match made in heaven, the match made in hell, Sid Justice as a referee, the Ultimate Warrior leaving. Can't wait.
Awesome,
dude. It's immense. We were talking before about how if you did a history of Randy Savage, it'd be a 9-part series with 3 hours of time at least. It feels that way with this, and it's so deep and it's so much fun. It's a blast.
I've treated it like a report, to be honest. I'm so desperate. I'm like, okay, we cannot miss a single detail. I've rewritten it, actually. I have to probably send you another email.
Brilliant.
I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait. Liam, do you have any other projects coming up you can mention, or that maybe you can't mention?
You know what? We'll
Last
see.
time.
We'll see.
All right.
Last time I had to kind of sidestep it, and I might have to do the same this time. But nothing that's immediate anyway. But if things come together and the time is right, I'll be sure to let you guys know first.
Wink
Awesome.
if you're excited about your career in professional wrestling. Oh, there we go.
That's our guy. Love it. Liam O'Rourke, thank you so much. Yeah, like I said, everyone check out Squared Circle Gazette Radio. Crazy Like a Fox is the book. If you enjoy Dark Side of the Ring, you have to read the book. You'll get the full picture there. Really appreciate it. Always great to talk to this guy. As far as Top Rope Nation goes, our next broadcast will be following, what is it? WrestleMania Backlash now they're calling it?
Yeah.
Backlash after WrestleMania, whatever it is. We'll be doing a post show this Sunday night, streaming live on the YouTube channel, and then the podcast will hit the feeds immediately after that. So
It's
subscribe.
not good, Ryan. It's not good. The podcast will be good.
The
but
podcast
not
will be
the
good.
Pay-per-view, yes.
Yeah, so the usual. Subscribe where you get your podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Top Rope Nation. Check out the Patreon page, patreon.com/Top Rope Nation. Yes, Kyle.
And speaking of AEW, as we were just talking about moments ago with Brian Jr., I believe I will be talking to you next, Mr. Drosty, Wednesday evening on the Locker Room.
That is true. We will be live on the Locker Room app. So I lied. That isn't our next show. We will be Wednesday night on the Locker Room app. It's only available on Apple devices right now, but you can join us live immediately after Dynamite. Ton of fun. We take calls. We talk to the listeners. Download the Locker Room app. You can follow me at @rdrosty. Kyle is at TRP Kyle on there. And when you follow us, we'll alert you when we go live. If you want to hear those shows in podcast format, there's one way to do that. That is becoming a patron of the show, as Liam is. Patreon.com/Top Rope Nation, one of our best, earliest patrons of the show. I'm mixing all of those Locker Room app shows and posting them as a bonus weekly show on Patreon. It's called Top Rope Nation Extra. You can hear it that way if you don't have an Apple device, or if you want to listen on your own schedule and you don't have the time to have the app open on your phone for an hour straight on Wednesday nights. So check that out. We'll be there Wednesday night, and like I said, Sunday night after the WWE pay-per-view. That's all for this edition of Top Rope Nation. For Liam O'Rourke and Kyle Ross, I am Ryan Drosty. We'll see you next time.